Have you ever shown your student a word and thought, there is absolutely no way you don't know this. We learned it last week. I have. Maybe they could match it perfectly during the lesson. Maybe they even got every vocabulary question right. Maybe you even reviewed it again at the end of the class. Then, a week later, nothing. And it's really easy to think they forgot it, I need to teach it again. But often the problem isn't that we didn't teach the vocabulary well enough. It's that recognizing a word isn't the same thing as being able to retrieve and use it. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I move students from I've seen that word before to actually being able to remember it, retrieve it, and use it when they need it. And I'll give you some very simple activities you can use in your next lesson. If we haven't met, I'm Megan from Florentis Learning. I create ready-to-teach ESL curriculum and practical tools to help independent ESL teachers like yourself spend less time prepping and more time teaching. And vocabulary is something I think about constantly when I'm designing lessons because learning a word once is actually the easy part. Getting that word to stick is much harder. So let's look at what's actually going on. So imagine I'm teaching the word enormous. I show my student a picture of an enormous elephant. I say, what does enormous mean? And underneath it, I give them three choices: tiny, enormous, hungry. They click enormous. Perfect! Then we do another activity. They match enormous with very big. Perfect again. At this point, it looks like my student knows the word. But then I take everything away. I show them a huge elephant and ask, how would you describe this elephant? And they say, big, I don't know. That tells me something important. The student could recognize enormous when I put it in front of them, but they couldn't retrieve it themselves. And if we aren't careful, a lot of vocabulary practice stays at that recognition level. Matching, multiple choice, drag and drop, word searches. Those activities aren't bad. I use them all the time. But they can be where vocabulary learning stops. Our students eventually need to produce the language without us putting the answer in front of them. So I think of vocabulary learning as a progression. Meet it, recognize it, retrieve it, use it, revisit it. Let me show you what that can look like. So let's look at step one. When students first meet a word, I want it connected to meaning, not just a translation or a definition. For younger learners, that might mean a picture, an action, an object, a facial expression, or a very simple situation. If we're learning exhausted, for example, I don't want to necessarily begin with, exhausted means very tired. I might act it out. Maybe I say, I ran and ran and ran now. And let the student respond. We can hear the word, say the word, connect it to the picture or action, maybe compare it with something they already know. Tired, exhausted. Now the word has something to attach itself to. And with beginners, this can be extremely simple. If the word is apple, we're connecting the sound apple to the object, the picture. Maybe the color. Maybe I like apples. The complexity changes with the level. The principle doesn't. Words need meaning. But this is where we sometimes stop too soon because the student says the word correctly and we think, great, learned. Not yet. Now, recognition activities become useful. Show me exhausted. Which person is exhausted? Match exhausted to the correct picture. Is this person excited, bored, or exhausted? These activities give students repeated exposure without demanding too much too quickly. And this is where games like matching, sorting, crosswords, word searches, even some of the vocabulary games I'm sharing on this channel can be used. But here's the question I want you to start asking yourself. Am I giving my student the answer? If the word is sitting on the screen and the student just has to select it, we're still working primarily on recognition. So now I want to take that support away. This is the step I think is easiest to miss. Instead of showing the student the word, make them find it in their own memory. So let's go back to exhausted. I remove the word. I show the picture. What word describes her? Now the student has to retrieve it. Or I might give a clue. Very, very tired. Or yesterday we learned a stronger word for tired. What was it? You can turn this into a game incredibly easily. One of my favorites is just a 5-second word storm. So you give the student a category like weather and tell them to go. And they say sunny, rainy, cloudy, windy, snowy. Or you say animals, go. Cat, dog, elephant, lion, tiger. You can make it more specific for stronger students. Give me 3 words we learned last week about the ocean. Now they're searching their memory rather than choosing from options you've provided. Another incredibly simple one is tell me 5. Tell me 5 things you can find in a kitchen. Tell me 5 adjectives for describing a person. Tell me 5 things we learned about space. No worksheet, no game platform, no prep. I use these all the time at the beginning of my lessons. But cognitively, the student is doing something very different. They're retrieving language. And don't be afraid of that little pause while they think. We sometimes rush to rescue students because silence feels uncomfortable online. Give them a few seconds. That struggle to remember is part of the practice. I'd actually love to know if you've noticed this with your students. Do you have a student who is fantastic when there are answer choices on the screen, but suddenly gets stuck when you remove them? Tell me in the comments because I think almost every teacher has taught that student. So now we go one step further. Knowing that enormous means very big still doesn't mean the student can naturally use enormous when speaking. So now we need to do something with it. For beginners, that might simply be the elephant is enormous. For another student, I might say, tell me something enormous. And for an even stronger student, would you rather have an enormous bedroom or an enormous garden? Why? Same vocabulary, completely different levels of language production. One activity I use all the time is a sentence challenge. Give the students 2 or 3 vocabulary words and challenge them to put them all in one sentence. So, for example, enormous elephant and supermarket. And this is where things can get ridiculous. Maybe the student says, an enormous elephant went shopping at a supermarket. Perfect. I don't care that it's silly. That's actually the part that I prefer because now the student is playing with the language and they're more likely to remember it. With stronger students, give them 3 or 4 words and tell them to create a mini story. Or have them ask you a question using one of the target words. Or describe a picture without telling you which vocabulary word they're trying to make you guess. We're moving beyond what does this word mean and towards what can you do with this word? And that's the goal. And now we get to the part that I think causes a lot of those, but I already taught this. Teacher, I already learned this. We did teach it 3 weeks ago, and then we moved on. Young language learners need to encounter useful vocabulary again and again. So vocabulary review shouldn't only happen on the vocabulary slide, or even only in the unit where the word was introduced. Bring old words back. If you taught weather 3 months ago and today's lesson happens to show a rainy picture, ask, what's the weather like? And if you learned clothing last month and the character's wearing a strange outfit, just ask, what is he wearing? If you're reading a story and you see vocabulary you've previously taught, stop for 5 seconds and retrieve it. You don't need an elaborate review activity every time. Sometimes just one question is enough. And this is something I deliberately think about when developing curriculum for Florentis learning. Vocabulary shouldn't exist once on a vocabulary slide and then disappear. We want students encountering language in stories, conversations, reading activities, games, questions, and later lessons. Because the goal isn't we covered that word. The goal is the student can use that word. And those are very different things. So the next time you're teaching vocabulary, try thinking about these 5 stages. Meet it, connect the word to the meaning. Recognize it, let students identify and distinguish it. Retrieve it, take the answer away and make them recall it. Use it, put it into sentences, questions, descriptions, and stories. And finally, revisit it. Bring it back after the lesson is over. You don't necessarily need more vocabulary activities. You may simply need to change what you're asking the student's brain to do with the vocabulary you already have. And that's a much more useful question than, did I teach this word? Ask, what has my student actually done with this word? If you're thinking, okay, Megan, but now I have to build all of this into every lesson. You don't. This progression is one of the things I think about when I'm creating the lessons inside Florentis Learning. If you'd like to see what that looks like, I've linked our free starter paths below. You can actually teach the lessons with your own students and see whether the approach works for you. No credit card, and you don't need to purchase anything to try them. But there's another frustrating problem. Sometimes your student does know the vocabulary. They understand your question, they have enough English to answer you, and you still get yes, no, dog, blue. If you're trying to move students from one-word answers into actual conversation, watch this video next.